All right, let's start off by adding a Docker file to this project. So here in the root of this project, we're going to add a new file called Docker file. Now, the first instruction we're going to use is from, which we use for specifying the base image. The base image can be an operating system like Linux or Windows, or it can be an operating system plus a runtime environment. For example, if you're a C# developer, you want to start from a .NET image. If you're a Python developer, you want to start from a Python image. If you're a JavaScript developer, you want to start from a Node image. Now, if you Google Docker samples, you can find this page, docs.docker.com/samples. Over here, you can see various examples of Docker files for different technology stacks. For example, for an ASP.NET Core application, you can see a Docker file right here. Now look at the from instruction. Over here, we have a full URL instead of an image because Microsoft images are not hosted on Docker Hub. They're hosted in Microsoft Container Registry. That's why we have MCR, which is short for Microsoft Container Registry. So an image can be in any registries. The default registry that Docker uses is Docker Hub. For any images in other registries, we have to type the full URL, okay? Now, don't just blindly take this URL because the URL can change or the version can change. So always do your own research. So that's one example. If you're a Django developer, you want to start from Python 3. Or in the future, you might want to use Python 4. Now, what about this project? Well, for this project, we need Node because as you saw, we need npm to install the application dependencies and start the application. So let's go to hub.docker.com and search for Node. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting because Node repository on Docker Hub has hundreds of Node images, and this can be a little bit confusing. So let's go to the tags. Here you can see various Node images. So if you scroll down, you can see there are tons of Node images for different versions built on different versions of Linux. For example, we have Node version 14.16.0 on top of Buster, which, if I'm not wrong, is Debian Linux version 10. So we have different versions of Node on different versions of Linux. The image you should choose really depends on your application. What version of Node do you want to target? We can go to our Docker file and say you want to start from Node, and by default, Docker assumes the latest tag. Do not ever use this because if you build your application against the latest version of Node, next time there is a new version of Node, if you rebuild your application's image, your application will be built with a different version of Node, and things can get unpredictable. So always use a specific version. So back to Docker Hub. Let's say I want to build this application against Node version 14. So here we search for 14. Now, once again, we have tens or maybe hundreds of Node images for version 14. Here's one we just talked about. There is more. We have version 14 on top of Buster. So this one doesn't have the minor build number. It's just the major version number. Now look at the size of this image. It's around 300 megabytes. And why do we have multiple items in this list? Well, this image is built for different operating system and CPU architectures. So there's two more here. As you can see, all of these are built on top of Linux. So as far as I know, we don't have a Node image built on top of Windows. I could be wrong. But if you want to run on top of Windows, you have to start from a Windows image and then install Node on top of it. There's no reason you want to do this because Windows images are really large. I think they're over 2 gigabytes. So back to the story. Depending on your CPU architecture, when you pull an image, Docker will automatically download the right Docker image for your CPU architecture, okay? Now, I don't want to use any of these images because these are way too large. And this is the compressed size. When this is uncompressed, it's going to be around 1 gigabyte. I want to go for a smaller image because I want to make my builds and deployments faster. So on this page, let's search for Alpine. Earlier, I told you that Alpine images are really small. Look at this. The compressed size is around 40 megabytes. This image is almost 10 times smaller than the other image you saw. Now look at the image tag. It's very specific. Version 14.16.0 of Node built on top of Alpine 3.13. I'm happy with this version, so I'm going to copy this and then paste it here. Okay, so that was the first step. Now back to our terminal window. Here in the project directory, we're going to build an image. So we run docker build -t for tagging the image. We're going to call this image React app, and we type a period to tell Docker where it can find a Docker file. That means in the current directory. Let's go ahead. Okay, the image is built. So now we're going to look at all the images we have on this machine using Docker images or Docker image ls. So currently we have 3 images. Here's the image that I just built. Now let's start a container with this image and see what happens. So docker run. We want to run this in the interactive mode so we can play with it. And the image is React app. What's going on here? We're inside a Node environment. So here we can write JavaScript code and Node will execute it. For example, we can define a constant and then log the constant. So we're inside a Node environment. We don't want this. We want to run bash so we can look at the file system. So we press Ctrl and C. Now it says to exit, press Ctrl and C one more time. Good. So the container is stopped. Let's run it one more time. So docker run interactive React app. Now at the end, we can specify the command to run when starting this container. We want to run bash. Now look, we get an error saying this module is not found. Why is that? Because Alpine Linux doesn't come with bash. That's why it's a very small Linux distribution. So it doesn't have many of the utilities you're familiar with. Instead of bash, it comes with shell, the original shell program. So one more time, docker run interactive React app. Instead of bash, we're going to use shell, sh. Okay, now we're doing a shell session inside this container. So let's look around. We have all these directories you're familiar with. We talked about this in the previous section. I hope you didn't miss that. So this is Alpine Linux. And in this image, we also have Node. So if you type node -- version, we can see the version of Node, which is 14.16.0. Now in this image, we don't have our application files. We only have Alpine Linux and Node. So in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to copy application files into this image.